Welcome back. In the previous video, we looked at the chemical equilibrium, and when we were looking at chemical equilibrium, we said that when a reaction takes place at an equal rate in both directions, then this is, we say an equilibrium has been reached. And what was important at that instant time is that we had to note the point that both the reactants and products are made at the same rate. So both the products are made at the same rate. Both the products and reactants, products and reactants. So both products and reactants are made at the same rate. As you see here we have blood cells, and we have what happens that in the blood cells we have plasma transports materials throughout the body. So carbonic acid dissolves in blood and it's transported to the lungs. We discussed about this in the previous lesson. In today's lesson, we will be looking at something else, and that is we will be looking at energy and chemical reaction. But before we go into these details, let's try to answer this question, explain why concentration is important in a chemical reaction. So concentration is important in a chemical reaction in that with concentration determines concentration of reactants and products, of course, determines the direction which is taken by this, determines the direction of the reaction. It determines the direction of the reaction. If, for instance, the reactants are more, then we will expect the reaction to move to your right. And in the other hand, if it happens that they are less than the products, then what will happen is that it will move to your left. So all chemical reactions cannot take place unless there is energy. So energy and chemical reaction. Energy and chemical reaction. So without energy, chemical reactions will not take place. Let's look at this diagram here clearly. It will help us understand this. So what happens? Energy is required to break bonds in reactants, and energy is released when bonds form in products. So overall, a chemical reaction either absorbs or releases energy. It either absorbs or releases energy. But before any chemical reaction takes place, what happens that when what happens is that when enough activation energy is added to the reactant bonds, to the reactants, that's when the bonds in the reactants break and the reaction begins. So reactions cannot begin unless we have activation energy. So imagine or think of an activation energy like taking a ball uphill so that it will gain this energy. So in this case, when this ball is here, it will be having this activation energy, and it will roll by itself down to the other direction. That is what this now will be the area. This is activation energy. This is the activation energy. This here will be the activation energy that is putting up the ball, and this going down, of course, will be the reaction. Reactions are of two types. Reactions are of two types, or can be categorized into two, depending on what they do. There is exothermic reactions. They release energy. Here energy is released. Then we have endothermic reactions where energy is absorbed. So the cost of energy release or energy absorption depends, of course, on the products in an exothermic reaction have lower bond. They have lower bond energy than the reactants. They have lower bond energy than the reactants. And the difference in bond energy and the difference in bond energy is released to the surrounding. So here we have the reactants, the difference in energy here. So if these are the products, so this is the difference between the energy. So we expected it to be at this line, but it will release energy. It will go beyond, and it releases energy. If you look at endothermic reaction, the products in an endothermic reaction have higher bond energy. They have higher bond energy than the reactants. So they have higher bond energy. Here are the reactants, and these ones are here. They have higher bond energy. Because they have higher bond energy than the reactants, the difference in bond energy is absorbed. The difference in bond energy is absorbed from the surrounding. Is absorbed from the surrounding. So here, energy is taken in or absorbed. Here, energy is released, and so forth. So chemical reactions release or absorb energy. That is what we are looking at today. Let's look at a video here. So we will be looking at this video here and try to see what we are talking about here. So here we are having a reaction. As you can see, what happens is that as you pour the chemical inside here, it releases energy. In some instances, instead, it releases energy. When it releases energy, that is, when it releases energy, here you are burning this and it has to take energy. So this one is taking in energy, this one is releasing energy. So the one that releases energy is exothermic reaction, and the one that takes energy is endothermic reaction. So here energy is released, as you can see, and energy is released as coal burns. Energy is released, for example. Here also as the gas burns, energy is released. So reaction in which heat is evolved and the temperature increases are called exothermic reactions. Respiration, which is glucose plus oxygen, carbon dioxide plus water, will release energy. This is also exothermic. Respiration is an exothermic reaction. It's an exothermic process or reaction. Then the composition of vegetables also is exothermic. It will release energy. It will release energy. This energy will be released in form of gas, which can be used in making food. But when we are boiling a substance in order for it to react, then here you are putting in energy, and because you are putting in energy, we call such a type as we call it as endothermic. We call it endothermic. Here is putting energy in order for this to move. Okay, so when you are putting in energy, here there must be light in order for silver to break down, silver chloride to break down to silver and chlorine molecules. All these, as we look at them, these are just but examples or reactions which need energy is absorbed, and these are endothermic reactions. These are endothermic reactions. So we are saying that we will start discussing or looking at these details. All chemical reactions involve change in energy. So all chemical reactions involve change in energy. Change involves change in energy. So all chemical reactions involve change in energy. Energy that is added to the reactants break their chemical bond. So energy that is added breaks chemical bonds. Breaks chemical bonds. Breaks chemical bonds. So when new bonds form in the products, energy is released. When new bonds form, energy is released. When new bonds form, energy is released. This is, of course, in the products. This was in the reactants. This was in the reactants. So this means that energy is both absorbed or released during chemical reactions. So some chemical reactions release more energy than they absorb. So when they release more energy than they absorb, then we call these exothermic reactions. So an exothermic reaction releases more energy than it absorbs. It releases more energy than it absorbs. On the other hand, endothermic reaction absorbs more energy. Endothermic reactions absorb more energy. It absorbs more energy than it releases. But you should note that in both the two, energy must be, in both the two, they need energy. So for these reactions to take place, energy must be supplied. And that is what now we call activation energy. That is what we call activation energy. So activation energy is the amount, it is the amount of energy. It is the amount of energy that needs to be absorbed. That needs to be absorbed. That needs to be absorbed. That needs to be absorbed for a chemical reaction to start. For a chemical reaction to start. Just like a car cannot start maybe without a battery, so this is like a battery. It is required to start the process or to start a reaction. So activation energy is like the energy you would need to push a rock up a hill. So once the rock is up on top of the hill, it rolls down the wayside by itself, as we already saw in the graph. As we saw in the graph. In this unit, I will give examples here. So examples here may include, for example, we are having examples of an exothermic reaction. We looked at many anyway. So exothermic has to release energy, and in organisms this includes like respiration. So respiration of course releases extra energy. Then it releases this energy in form of heat and even light in some organisms. Even light in some organisms. Other reactions also do the same. Other reactions also do the same. The reactions we were looking at here are the normal reactions, but in biological reactions also these things happen. Also these things happen. Then we have an endothermic endothermic reaction, photosynthesis. So from the name, it tells you that energy will be consumed, photo. So during photosynthesis, light energy is required to run this, and because light energy is required, then this is an endothermic process, and this energy is supplied by the sun. This energy is supplied by the sun. So during photosynthesis, plants absorb energy from the sunlight and use that energy to make simple sugars and complex carbohydrates. So in the next class, we will be looking at enzymes. We will be looking at enzymes. We will stop here for today.